Hi, I'm Mark Gaylor and I'm a Sony Imaging Ambassador, and I'm really pleased to be able to talk to you today about Sony's Alpha 6700 APS-C or crop sensor camera. Now, way back in 2021, I created an APS-C seminar for my Patreon support channel, and it had me questioning whether there was going to be a future for Sony's APS-C lineup of cameras and lenses. Now, this led me to invite Sony to throw everything at their APS-C lineup. Now, I was really pleased to see the AF tracking that we saw on the Alpha 6400, and I was really looking for a premium version of an update to the Alpha 6500, but I don't think the 6600 lit my fire. I was left feeling that Sony could have thrown maybe a little bit more at that camera, namely a backlit illuminated sensor, a UHS 2 card slot, a front dial, a USB-C 3.2 rather than their USB 2 in-out port, 3 memory recalls rather than 2 found on the Alpha 6600, plus the camset file that we first saw in the same year that the Alpha 6600 was released. This allows a user to save all of their camera settings to a single file on the memory card. And this allows me to share my camset files with my patrons so they can set up their cameras exactly the way that I outline in my 500 and 600 page ebooks, just with a simple file copied to their memory card. I also was looking for an option for uncompressed RAW or lossless RAW because we were still having that compressed only choice for the Alpha 6600. I was also looking for a move from 12-bit to 14-bit when shooting long exposure with noise reduction and also bulb mode. And I was also looking for a faster shutter speed than the 1/4000th of a second. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that is needed a little bit later. But I'm very pleased to say at very, very long last, we do see the Exmor R sensor now appearing in the Alpha 6700 camera. This was a game-changing sensor way back in 2008 when it appeared in mobile phones such as the iPhone, and it really transformed the mobile phone market. It basically allowed people to take reasonable quality images on their phones, and this pretty much decimated the digital compact camera market. Well, that was until Sony scaled their Exmor R sensor up and put it in their RX100 Mark II camera, and this basically single-handedly saved the digital compact market. It took a few years again before we see that Exmor R sensor scaled up again, and we saw it appear in their full-frame mirrorless cameras, the Alpha 7R2. And again, this was a transformative move by Sony. It had me saying that I don't think I was going to hang on to my DSLRs any longer, because now I truly believe that the future was in the mirrorless cameras. It's again probably taken 8 years before we've seen that Exmor R sensor now appear in an APS-C body, but I'm very pleased to say that with the Alpha 6700 camera, it has indeed arrived. Back in 2021, I was just saying, well, just put the backlit illuminated sensor in a compact camera such as the Alpha 7C, and maybe just throw in PP11, S-Cinetone, active steady shot, and 60 frames per second, and you'll have the movie makers as well as the still shooters really happy. So I didn't really see why Sony were waiting to reinvigorate their APS-C lineup of cameras. Basically, I was saying, if you build it, they will come, and I'm sure the Alpha 6700 will prove the case. In 2022, last year, I got a little bit excited because we did see that our sensor appear in their cinema line FX30, which is basically the FX3. This really reinforces my idea that you could put that crop sensor in an Alpha 7C camera and people would be entirely happy with that move. Now, I didn't see a lot of still shooters rushing out and buying the FX30 because it was a cinema line camera and basically it had no mechanical shutter or burst mode, so it was really not designed for still shooters. Here we are, 2003, we have finally the Alpha 6700 camera, and it ticks all the boxes. Okay, it's got that Exmor-R backlit illuminated sensor, the Beyonz XR processor, the UHS-2 card slot, active steady shot, the side flip monitor, the 0.7 finder magnification, which is superior to the finder we find on the Alpha 7C. We've got the touch icons and menus that we've seen appear on the ZVE1. We've got a front dial as well as the rear dial, something that will be very, very popular. We've got 422 10-bit movies, multiple custom keys, more than we find on the Alpha 7C. We've got that AI subject recognition that we first saw on the Alpha 7R5, the active steady shot, 120p 4K. That's going to make a lot of movie makers very excited. We've got the digital audio multi-interface shoe. We've got fast 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi transfer, and we've got that USB 3.2 USB in-out port. Now, there's many more I could actually fit onto that chart, so I'll just run down a few more if you bear with me. We've got 26 megapixels on that backlit illuminated sensor. It might seem like an odd growth from 24, but if you look at the pixel density of the Alpha 7R5, if we shoot in APS-C mode on that Alpha 7R5, we are indeed shooting in 26 megapixels. So I think that is the reason that we have a 26 megapixel sensor now. We have a whopping 759 phase detect auto focus points. That's up from 425 found on the Alpha 6600. We have a limitless buffer when shooting compressed RAW, i.e. the camera does not slow down. We basically fill the card before the camera slows down. We've got an autofocus sensitivity. That's the ability of the camera to focus in very low ambient light down to -4 EV. This doubles the ability of the camera to focus accurately and track focus in very low ambient light. We've got S&Q Full HD 240 frames per second. That's doubled that from the Alpha 6600. This is now 10 times slow motion in Full HD. We've got the auto framing that you saw me review on the new ZVE1. This allows the camera to change the framing even when the camera is fixed onto a tripod. We've got focus breathing, focus bracketing, AF assist, full-time DMF, which is another game changer. We've got touch shutter, bulb timer settings that we also saw on the Alpha 7R5. We've got external flash settings that now allow the A6000 series cameras to use the smallest RM flash, the HVL-28 RM, because we can use the camera's menus to control that flash. We have save load settings, and I talked about that CamSet file. And with the ability to update the camera with firmware updates via a memory card with a file copied to the memory card, so we no longer have to plug the camera into the computer. Going back to that 1/4000th per second, that hasn't increased to 1/8000th per second. So if you are shooting with an f1.4 wide aperture prime lens in full sun, there is a risk that you might overexpose the highlights, because we really need to be shooting at 1/8000th per second or reduce the sensitivity. So we can do this by just coming out of ISO Auto and choosing ISO 50, putting an ND2 filter in front of the lens, or move into silent shooting, which does support that 1/8000th of a second. So it's not a deal breaker in my opinion, but it would have been nice to have that 1/8000th of a second. Now, as I go through the camera, I'm preparing and just putting the finishing touches to a 550-page ebook that I will distribute via my patreon.com/Mark Ayler support channel. And there's the link there. I've got the Q&A forums. I've got over 20 hours of video seminars and the CamSet files as well as those ebooks. Okay, back to the camera. 759 phase detect auto focus points. That basically pretty much covers the entire sensor. So what we're leading up here is a camera that can act as a sports camera with its limitless capability to shoot at 11 frames per second until the camera card is full without the camera slowing down. And so long as you use a fast focusing lens, this camera can be used for sports photography. Just a word about some of the things that if you are asking, is this feature on this camera? Obviously, the small form factor precludes the use of dual card slots, and the camera does not have a Malta selector, although we can use the monitor as a touchpad to move a focus point around the screen. We don't have FTP options that we see on the full frame cameras, and we don't have the anti-dust function, which is where the shutter closes when we power the camera down to try and reduce the amount of dust entering when we're changing lenses. Not carried over from the vlogging cameras, namely the ZVE1, is the active dynamic steady shot, framing stabilizer, background defocus, product showcase, cinematic vlog styles, and the flexible exposure mode. So if you are looking as a vlogger for those features, the Alpha 6700 camera is great for movies, but it's perhaps not pitched for vlogging as much as the vlogging cameras. We do, however, have the great subject recognition, and this really requires an AI processing unit. I did have a lot of people saying, am I going to get this subject recognition to my Alpha 1 or other Alpha camera? And really, it does require the AI processing unit and that XR processor to drive this feature, and drive it does. So this was a screen grab from my Alpha 7R5 review, where I was highlighting the fact that this camera can find animals even when they have their back of their head turned towards the camera. Sony claimed a 40% improvement, but no previous camera could recognize the animal without the animal turning towards the camera and the eye recognition kicking in. So this was to highlight the fact that even when the eye is in deep shadow or the head is quite angled away from the camera, we still get effective AF tracking. And I tested this with the Alpha 6700 at the zoo, and it does indeed detect a very, very broad range of animals, pretty much every animal that I could point the camera at. And of course, it does that auto switching between animal and bird, so you don't need to move between bird IF and animal IF. You just have it set to that auto switching animal to bird. If you're looking at more information about that subject recognition, I do have a subject recognition video tutorial on my YouTube channel there. Another great game-changing feature I did say was that full-dome DMF. If you've been photographing insects and then you suddenly want to photograph something over there on the horizon line, this full-time DMF just allows you to turn the focus ring, pull focus to reasonably close to where the subject is, and then let the auto focus take over. It's a really great way of shifting the focus, so even when the viewfinder is completely blurred, you can help the long telephoto lens out by saying it's over there and then letting the autofocus snap to it very quickly without the camera tracking backwards and forwards looking for the subject. Great new feature on this camera is time-lapse movies created in the camera. We no longer have to use the interval timer. So this allows us to use intervals longer than 5 seconds as well. And we'd access that now not from the interval timer menu, but from a new time-lapse menu. And we can access that by just choosing S&Q for 124K slow motion footage, or our time-lapse movies where we can fast forward time to have clouds skimming across the sky. So we've also got that focus bracket feature that was first introduced with the Alpha 7R5, and I've also got a video tutorial that showcases how to use this feature. First question is why would you choose APS-C over a full frame camera? And no, it's not just because of cost, because there is compelling reasons for some photographers to lean towards APS-C rather than full frame, and here is the main reason. We're looking at an APS-C camera there on the left, the 6600 camera with the 70 to 350 G lens. That has almost the same reach as that 200-600 full frame lens on the full frame camera. So we're looking at less than half the weight, less than half the price, less than half the size, but pretty much all of the performance. Okay, so it's definitely a question of less is more for many photographers. And it's not just about the cost, because some people who are wanting that form factor and prepared to spend a little bit of money on that, they're really not wanting the camera to be significantly cheaper than an entry-level full-frame camera. Why Sony APS-C? And I'll just showcase this. The Sony APS-C camera is way over there on the left, and we've got three other crop sensor formats in the middle and the full frame over on the right. And so that space is reserved for thin air. So if you're looking for a small APS-C mirrorless format, then Sony is the go-to system to keep size and weight down. And Sony keep proving that over and over again by making lighter, smaller APS-C lenses. One of the only drawbacks with using an APS-C camera for somebody maybe shooting fast action or birds in flight is we could experience just a little bit more noise than when working with a full frame camera. But now we're in the era of AI noise suppression, where we can get ISO 4000 images looking like ISO 400 images. This is sort of a problem that has basically disappeared from view. Now, the Alpha 6700 camera has good ISO performance, but combined with an AI noise reduction that we find in DxO or Topaz or Lightroom, we can get beautifully clean and detailed images even using APS-C systems. Now, I was using these APS-C lenses on full frame cameras because I went for a couple of years where saying the Sony's best APS-C camera was an Alpha 1 or an Alpha 7R4, Alpha 7R5 camera. But now I don't have to make that recommendation any longer. So this is the 70-350G on an Alpha 7R4. This is the same lens on an Alpha 7R5 when I spent a month in India traveling really light and I didn't want to take the 100-400 GM or the 200-600G. And so this is shooting in 26 megapixels when shooting with this lens on an Alpha 7R5 camera. And it's not just that lens, it's basically pretty much all categories of lens. On the lens on the left is a 7.5 times travel lens, and again it's coming in significantly cheaper, smaller and lighter than the 10 times 24-240 zoom that we have on the right there. And that's 7.5 times 18-135 lens, which has an equivalent of 28 to over 200 millimeters range there. It is a cracking lens. It's pin sharp. Okay, so maybe not quite pin sharp, wide aperture on the wider focal lengths, but we do have other lenses to choose from if you're a landscape photographer looking to shoot with wide open apertures there. And so I've traveled with this lens and I've got no complaints for image sharpness on crop sensor cameras, as you can see from these examples here. And here's a close-up and you can see the fine detail of the hairs around this bird's eye, and you can see you're not going to be apologizing that you're using an APS-C camera in this instance. And of course, the form factor extends to ultra wide aperture primes. Here's the 15mm f1.4G lens, and you can see how small that is compared to a 1.4G master lens for a full frame camera. And also we can use full frame lenses, but emulate longer focal length lenses. So I'm a fan of using the 85mm Sony f1.8, and it sort of behaves very much like my own Batis 2.8 135. If we start looking at the images you pull off from a crop sensor camera using the 85, we've got the depth of field very much equivalent and reminiscent of that 135 f2.8 Batis. And that's enough shallow depth of field for many users. And so again, APS-C users don't need to apologize that they're getting extra depth of field because they're using a smaller sensor. So I'm going to put ultra high definition examples up so you can zoom in on my Flickr Pro account and check the sharpness of these particular images. So if we look at side-by-side comparisons of the 85 1.8 alongside the 2.8 135 Batis, you can see it's a very, very similar look, very hard to pick. We typically are using very low ISO values as well, so noise doesn't come into the equation at all as it did with the bird photography and action photography. This also extends out to the ultra wide angle lenses. We've got Sony's 11mm f1.8 lens compared to the Batis 2.8 18mm lens, and you can see you're going to save $900 and a lot of weight by going for an APS-C system. And that 11mm is a cracking lens. So I also took it to India when I was shooting with my Alpha 7R5. It has a 16.5mm full frame equivalent angle of view, and it is sharp corner to corner. So I really enjoy using this lens on APS-C and full frame cameras. Here it is performing on an Alpha 6600 camera at dawn when I was testing the lens. And of course, because of that f1.8 aperture, we can shoot at the very first light of day, and it could even turn its hand to astrophotography for APS-C users. Sigma have also got a range of 1.4 wide aperture primes for the Sony APS-C cameras, and these have been very popular lenses such as the Sigma 30mm 1.4 and the 56 1.4, which is a great portrait lens. Now I've tested that Sigma 56 1.4. It is indeed a cracking lens with very shallow depth of field. It's behaving like an 85 f2 lens. I would say though, if you're looking to purchase the Alpha 6700 as a second camera, as a lightweight travel camera, and you already own some small f1.8 primes such as the Zeiss 55, I possibly would just stick with your 55. The outcome between that 56mm Sigma and this 55mm Sony, they're very similar. It's only 2/3 of a stop on that shallow depth of field. So as long as you can get reasonably close to your subject, you are going to pull very shallow depth of field, even with the 55mm 1.8. Perhaps the only 1.4 Sigma lens that I would pass over is that Sigma 16mm 1.4, because Sony had that 15mm 1.4, which is much lighter, and it's even got a slightly wider angle of view as well. At 219 grams compared to 405 grams, this is a must-have ultra-wide aperture lens if 1.4 is your thing. Let's have a look at the body design of the Alpha 6700 now. This hasn't come out of thin air, and it relates more to the Alpha 7C than the Alpha 6600. You can see alongside they look, indeed they look very similar, but as we look into the cameras in more detail, we're going to find more and more differences. This camera has been reworked significantly. It's not just an APS-C sensor squeezed into an Alpha 7C body. Remember that viewfinder is better, so if you've got any reservations about that viewfinder that you may have heard negative things about on the Alpha 7C body, it's not that viewfinder. Side by side with the Alpha 6600, just because it's been based on a full frame compact camera, you are not going to put on any weight. In fact, it's 10 grams or 1/3 of an ounce lighter than the Alpha 6600 camera. If we look at the side-on view, the card slot is now on the side of the camera, much preferred to in the battery compartment underneath the camera. We can see that the camera has a bigger grip than the Alpha 7C. It's got that front dial, which the Alpha 7C doesn't have, and it has that better EVF. And if we take a closer look at some of the ports behind those closed doors, you can see the USB-C in-out port has moved. The card slot has done a 180-degree inversion, and the HDMI port has moved as well. So that USB 3.2 does have the faster workflows, which is why I was a little bit disappointed with the USB 2 in-out port on the Alpha 6600 premium camera before this. This does mean now that we can basically take all of the raw files off a 32 gigabyte Sony fast SDXC2 card in just 2.5 minutes. In fact, the data transfer rate is only limited by the card itself. I would like to call for Sony on a future upgrade to maybe consider putting the CF Express SDXC2 card slot for even faster data transfers in the future. We have a new position for a custom button, the C1, which is on the grip there. Now, Sony have explored putting custom keys on this position before, but they've been too easily pressed. Now, I've been working with this camera for several weeks, and I have not accidentally pressed this custom key in that time. So I think Sony have done its homework now, and this does now prove to be a useful custom key on the Alpha 6700 body. I'm really impressed with this new Stills Movies S&Q dial that we first saw on the Alpha 7 IV camera. This now allows you to have 3 dedicated memories for stills, 3 more for movies, and 3 more for S&Q. It just means that you're hardly ever going to go into the menus once you've set up the camera, which I think is why my CamSet files are so popular, because I can set up your camera in probably less than a minute via one of my CamSet files. So just to recap, we've got the front and customizable rear dials, larger grip, improved finder, Stills Movies S&Q dial, and additional custom buttons. So it's definitely a step up from both the Alpha 6600 and the Alpha 7C cameras. We also have touch screens. Now, if you looked at my ZV-E1 review, we can see that the touch menus now are really coming into their own, as we can swipe in touch-sensitive icons to control features, and that as well as the FN menu. So this is in addition to using an FN menu. And we also have those main menus. So if you've got slightly larger fingers and you're trying to work with menus, it's better to try and select the option that you want to modify from the main menus rather than menus themselves. But this shooting screen is a really great feature, and you probably will not need to use menus once you've set up your camera. As I said, I will be sharing my CamSet files from my patreon.com/Mark Gaylor support channel. It is definitely the most supportive Alpha channel out there on the planet. The main menus give you options for loads of adjustments that you can make, which is why you can avoid going into the menus. And of course, we do now have the option of not only shooting in RAW, but also now shooting in lossless compression. So this is a great new feature for the A6000 series cameras. And as I said, you can bring in the swipe. You can move them out of the way, or just swipe left or right to bring them one at a time, or both in to start adjusting your main parameters for shooting. We also have a footer icon, so by swiping up or just enabling the touch control, we can now modify shutter speed, aperture, ISO, and exposure compensation via touch without using the physical controls on the camera. For exposure compensation, for instance, you just touch the icon, swipe left or right to increase or decrease brightness. Essential settings. If you take ownership of this camera, the first things I definitely recommend that you do is just go into the menus and make sure that you choose different settings for stills and movies. So if you're moving between the two, you're not left with inappropriate settings. So you're not left with a very fast shutter speed when you go into movies, left over from stills. Okay, really useful feature. And as I said, firmware updates will now be done from a memory card, not by plugging your camera into a computer. CamSets, as I've said, we can go into the save load settings, save all of the camera settings when we've got that, and then store them as a backup on the computer. So if we ever need to initialize the camera, we can just restore all of our preferred settings from that file. Let's talk about APS-C lens recommendations. Some people might have reservations about APS-C because the lens lineup maybe is not as extensive as Sony's full frame E-mount lineup. But let's look at some of the advantages from Sony's lens lineup that we have when choosing APS-C lenses. So here's the closest two comparisons I could get: the 20 millimeter f1.8G compared to the 11 millimeter 1.8. That 11 millimeter actually has a wider angle of view, but probably a little bit more depth of field because of the crop factor of APS-C. But you can see the form factor of that 11 millimeter is significantly smaller than the 20 mil 1.8G, which is not a large lens, but you can see how much we can shave off by choosing APS-C lenses. And because it does have that wider angle of view, if you are holding the camera at arm's length when vlogging, that wider angle of view in active steady shot is an improvement, because when you're shooting in active steady shot with the associated crop factor, it does get a little bit tight on a 20 mil focal length. So having that 11 millimeter is a certain advantage there. Let's take a look at 1635 equivalents. Okay, so there's the full frame on the left, and we've got an excellent 10-20 millimeter power zoom f4. That's the APS-C at just 6.3 ounces or 178 grams. That is a real featherweight zoom there, and it is tack sharp corner to corner. So if you're just going to buy three premium G lenses, you'd go for the 1020, the 1655 f2.8G, and the 70 to 350G OSS lenses. And of course, there are additional specialist lenses that you can add to that lens lineup, such as Sigma and Sony primes, lightweight zooms, and you can even choose from the compact full frame Sony primes as well. And if we were just to go out with those three G lenses there and put them all with the 6700 camera, you'd have an effective working zoom range, full frame equivalent, from 15 millimeters to 525 millimeters, and that entire kit would weigh in at 4.4 pounds or just 2 kilograms. Put that in a camera bag with a few other things, you're going to be carrying a camera bag that is probably less than 6 pounds, and that is really the raison d'etre for owning an APS-C system. And if you're not going to buy the Sony premium G lenses, there are, of course, so the E-mount system is supported by both Sigma and Tamron. So we have, for instance, the Sigma 1850 f2.8 zoom, and we also have the Tamron 1770. So the Tamron gives you a little bit more range, but a larger lens, and the Sigma gives you less range in a slightly small form factor. So we have lots of choice here. So I'm just going to make some quick recommendations here. A wide aperture travel kit, I'd go for that 7.5 times zoom, the 18135, and put in three prime lenses, maybe the Sigma 1.456, the 15 mm 1.4, and Sony's 11 mm f1.8. Of course, that does give you three very wide aperture primes as well as the 7.5 times zoom. If you're going out and you're looking more to shoot wildlife and landscape, maybe you would put in the 70 to 350 lens, and maybe now you'd prioritize for optimum quality the 1655 f2.8G zoom. If you were a vlogger, you would probably go for the 1020 power zoom first, and then you would add in maybe the ultra wide angle of view from the 11 millimeter and the telephoto zoom, the 18 to 105 f4G power zoom. So you've got two power zooms and a very wide angle prime to go with you. So let's take a look at some ultra high definition review images. So if you're viewing this in 4K, that's great. But if you're not, then you can just look for the link in the info section below the movie and go over to my Flickr Pro account. I'm actually going to upload really high resolution images, so you can click to zoom in beyond 4K. So first off, I'm using a 7200 G, which is a half macro lens, but when you're used on an Alpha 6700, it's got a magnification ratio of 0.75, add in a 1.4 teleconverter, and you've got 1.1 full macro capability from this lens, and the lens is absolutely superb. So I would recommend this lens for full frame users and also APS-C users, and they're going in with a little bit of a crop, getting that full 1.1 macro capability from this APS-C camera, and having that ultra fast 4 linear focus motors in that lens just means that you can keep perfect track on that little bee. And remember, the AI subject recognition is set to insect, so it's going to really track the head of that bee very faithfully indeed. And so I was really enjoying getting to grips in the butterfly house and also out in the botanical gardens with all manner of small wildlife. As you can see from this, absolutely superb pin sharp performance from this camera and lens. Getting in really close now. Again, this was captured with the 2.8135 Batis, which is now behaving like an f4 200mm focal length on the crop sensor cameras. Superb detail and beautiful shallow depth of field as well. Now with the 7200, just tracking a couple of baby elephants now, and there's my dog on the beach running, and again lots of pin sharp images, really faithful AF tracking with the AI subject recognition set to animal bird auto switching mode there. And again, just to remind you, limitless buffer. So I was using the drive mode set to high, compressed raw, fast ST-XC2 card, and the camera will never slow down. Here's with a 2x teleconverter now on that 7200 half macro lens. You can really get close to some wildlife now using this combination of that macro lens and a teleconverter. Now putting on the 1655 f2.8G to showcase the corner-to-corner sharpness of this particular lens, and now shooting wide open just so you can check the corner sharpness wide open. Shooting some landscapes on tripods, long exposures, getting in with good zoom on these urban landscapes. Portraits with the 85mm f1.8 now at maximum aperture, again getting that 2.8135 look, same sort of aesthetic as that full frame configuration there. And now working in a lower ambient light with ISO slightly raised, and no noise reduction on these, just showing you good capabilities even in low light environments that we're shooting in these laneways in Melbourne CBD. I think you're probably getting the idea. This is a no compromise APS-C camera, some great examples to showcase, and again you'll see the full resolution files on my Flickr Pro account. So I would just like to highlight that this camera will suit people who are wanting to travel really light. I'm going to travel really light up to Nepal in September, October, and of course I am really going to prioritize a lightweight camera system. I'm certainly not going to be taking an 8x10 landscape camera. I'm going to be prioritizing an APS-C or compact full frame camera when I go, because I really don't want to be a pack mule when working on these sorts of trips. And you can spot me, I've used this slide many times before, but you can always spot me traveling light. I'm the one in the middle. These guys are carrying tripods that are heavier than my entire camera system, and because I don't want to be scaling really high sand dunes, carrying more than just a couple of kilos. Okay, so there is that raison d'etre for the APS-C system. Just look at that 4.4 pounds or 2 kilogram weight, and just imagine that in a small compact messenger bag. I'm using the Pilot 7L messenger bags to carry this type of configuration around with me. And remember, you can catch up with me on my support channel, patreon.com/Mark Ailey, if you want to access those ebooks and camset files. Okay, and remember those ebooks are 500 and 600 pages long. There are no contracts or commitments, so one US $10 payment will allow you to download the camset and also the ebook. Okay, so I'm Mark Gaylor, Sony Imaging Ambassador, and just give me the thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see future videos that I post to my channel.